Alright, I think a couple of folks are still signing in, but it's 2:11, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started so I can honor your time.
Thank you.
You got it. So, last group of the day, thank you guys for being here. My name is Beth Smith, and I am the 612, the secondary ELA Professional Learning Coordinator for the district. This is the team. I'm gonna get right off that because I don't like that picture. So I have not been in this position very long, about a year and a half. Prior to that, was a secondary teacher for 26 and a half years. In Cobb, took me a long time to decide to use that educational leadership degree and move out. COVID pushed me in that direction. I'm not gonna lie, that was a lot. But I also started realizing during COVID just how much support teachers really needed, and that's something that I've always loved to do, is to support my colleagues. So it just felt like a natural extension of my work. So remembering our why, I always put this in. I know it's kind of cliche, but thinking about students always helps me when I'm stressed out. And now that I've moved into this position, and this is going to sound corny maybe, but I think about you. I think about my colleagues. And then, so I figure, how if I support you, then I'm de facto supporting them as well. And one thing that I said in my interview for this position is that sat in way too many professional learning sessions that were, quite frankly, a waste of my time. And so my commitment to my audiences would be to always try not to waste your time. So I'm hoping that you take at least one or two things away from this session today that you find useful. Our learning targets are lofty. I have not gotten through the entire thing yet, so I probably won't with you either, but I front-loaded the best stuff, so we'll get to what we can get to. We're going to explore the difference in explicit versus incidental vocabulary acquisition, examine some effective vocabulary instructional strategies that can be used in all content areas, and consider the importance of background knowledge as it relates to reading comprehension. I'm going to move through this. I'm trying to get you some content that I haven't gotten to. So, has anyone heard this buzzword in education right now, the science of reading? Science of reading. This is on everyone's lips. It's a very, very hot topic in academia right now, and it has gotten to this point for a couple of reasons. One, lots of parent-led grassroots groups of students, parents of students with dyslexia, in the last 10 or 15 years, have really grown and become very vocal about getting their students' needs met. They have lobbied legislators in states across the country. My child is not being taught to read. My child is in 4th grade and still can't read. The methods that these teachers are using do not work for my child. And so they've been very, very vocal about that. And then something happened. COVID. And all the littles were at home in front of a computer doing their reading lessons, and their parents were listening to it, and they were like, wow, that's a kind of a strange way to learn to read. Look at the pictures. Is that a good reading strategy? Look at the pictures. And so lots of things started to bubble up. And then at the same time, this podcast came out by Emily Hansford, the NPR educational reporter, Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? And it was a scathing indictment of the state of literacy in our country, and how many students making 4th grade still not reading on grade level. And so those two things kind of created the perfect storm for us to start looking at why aren't kids being taught to read, and what do we need to do to shift that. So states have been passing laws left and right. You can see South Carolina kicked us off in 2014, Georgia in 2023. We've got some legislation of our own. Senate Bill 48 says that every public school district in the state of Georgia has to have a dyslexia screener in place for K-2 students by the year 25-26. Ours is already in place this year. It's a slow rollout, and then we'll be rolling it out more officially next year. We also have a bill called the Georgia Literacy Bill that dictates what kinds of materials we can purchase for our elementary students to learn to read, and there's a task force that's going to go into all of our colleges and universities to make sure that pre-service teachers are being taught how to teach students to read in research-based ways. And that's what science of reading really is. It's just it's a catchword, a catchphrase that refers to this vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And even though this body of research has been 50 plus years in the making, the invention of the MRI really catapulted it further, because now scientists can see which parts of the brain literally light up. And we now know that we as humans, we think, are the only animal on earth that actually rewire our brains. We create a new circuit in our brains when we learn to read, which is pretty cool. So all of the PL that we do in the English department is aligned to this reading model called Scarborough's Reading Loop. I'm just gonna go through it really quickly. We could do a whole PL just on this. Basically, this model says that we need two big categories of skills to read. One, we need to be able to comprehend language. Now, that we're all born to do that. We are wired to do that naturally. That's why my 2.5-year-old granddaughter Roxy has a pretty decent little vocabulary right now. I'm not teaching her. I'm not sitting down and explicitly teaching her words necessarily. She's just absorbing it from the environment, right? She's acquiring language because that is what we are wired to do biologically. We are not wired for this section, word recognition. We are not wired to look at this symbol on a paper and know, oh, that's the letter C and it represents the sound K. We don't know that. That has to be explicitly taught. When we have language comprehension, when we understand the word cat, we know that we see a cat, we know they say meow, we recognize a cat when we see it, and we can say all the letters, all the sounds, cat. Then we map that to these symbols on paper, and then we have reading, okay? It's a lot, and we count on our K2 counterparts to do this part for us, don't we, right? Do they come to us, some of them still not having this? Yeah, we do have some students that make it to high school with gaps in being able to sound out words and decode words, but typically we live up here. In the research that I've done in the past 2 years, this one thing has come up over and over again. The way that we're going to move the needle on our students' reading ability is these top two pieces of this language comprehension part of the road. Strengthening their background knowledge and strengthening their vocabulary. And that is something that every teacher in this school has a part in, regardless of your content area. So we're gonna start with vocabulary in a second. This is your literacy initiative goal. You know that every school has to have one for literacy, for math, and then a school chosen goal. You guys want to increase the percentage of students reading at or above grade level. You want a 3% increase as indicated by the reading inventory, the RI, by the end of the year. And one of the critical action steps that you've taken is the implementation of your literacy block, third period. You got that cool extra chunk of time. Monday, introduce the close reading of a text. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, write about it. And then Friday, hopefully having time to either peer revise papers or discuss the piece, having that rich student discourse. And so I love this. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening, all the English language arts in your literacy block is really cool. All right, so we're gonna start with like a vocabulary instruction. And so there's some pens and some blank sheets of paper on the table if you need them. I would like for you to just for like 90 seconds, minute and a half, individually thinking to yourself and jotting answers to these two questions. What does vocabulary instruction currently look like in your classes? And what have you noticed about your current students' vocabulary knowledge? Couple of ideas here, couple of ideas here, quietly first, and then we'll discuss.
Just drop your stuff. We read every day, right? Every day. Yeah, because they don't come in the business. Right. Every day good. A good strong vocabulary in order to engage in a conversation.
And in my class, vocabulary instruction looked like
I mean, really from literacy, and to reach just so that's the least part of it. When I'm teaching a new unit and I have to show vocabulary. But I've noticed students with knowledge, I noticed they don't have a lot of students with these foundational skills.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah, because I'm still teaching, when you see something and you break it up, yeah.
All right, it seems like the discussion has already started.
Yeah,
So we'll go ahead and at your tables, talk about what vocabulary instruction currently looks like in your classes and what you notice about your current students' vocabulary knowledge, and then we'll have some opportunity to share our curriculum.
They have to and the word linear, like keep it linear, it's
Because we're growing up, I forgot to tell you my signal. Okay, so I'm hearing some rich conversations, and I hate to cut it off that soon. I'd like for you to be able to talk some more. But I heard some and saw some cool things that are going on in classes. I'm interested in both, but I'm mainly interested in that second bullet. What have you noticed about your current students' vocabulary knowledge?
It's limited.
Okay, can you expound on that?
They do not understand that, excuse me.
I was just trying to talk to them.
I love your attention. They come to us lacking the knowledge and how to break down words, as we were speaking here. What was your biped? What was
No,
your
it's
word?
binomial.
Binomial, and knowing that bi means two, linear, breaking down to line, uni means one, so I always say unicycle, so one wheel, bicycle, bi, two wheels, and we have to start from growing up. We already knew that coming into high school, but they don't. And they don't know how to break down the words to make it make sense to them, and then to help figure it out in their own minds instead of somebody telling them exactly what it means. We got to get away from that.
Yes.
Our kids are hurting.
Yes.
So figuring out intent, we were talking about music, trying to teach students how to read music.
Yes.
It's a whole, it's like starting from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But once they know how to read, and even if they have something there and they see a comma, they don't pause. So it's not, they read it, but in their mind they're not like reading to know what's happening. And sometimes, and I see it in science too, you can give them a paragraph to read, they read it, and they might know even the vocabulary, but it's the context behind it, the intent of what it's trying, the paragraph is trying to tell them.
So they're not reading with fluency and prosody, they're not putting that expression, they're not using punctuation as, clues where to break phrases apart and all that. Thank you.
I just wanted to piggyback off of that because I had a discussion with my students today in my math class about that very thing, because I try to model it in my classroom every time they don't write something mathematically accurately. And like I'll say, okay, what's the axis of symmetry? 2. Is that how I write an axis of symmetry? No. What is it? X equals 2. Then why are you saying 2? But that happened in my class today. We were finding an average. We were finding the average of 5 numbers. And I said, okay, how do you find an average? And they said, add it up and divide by how many you have. And I said, okay, then write 6, 7, comma. Is that how I write add? So they are not using notation to mean to communicate what they mean. They abuse equal signs, they abuse commas, they abuse parentheses, and they're not reading that notation. And I correct them in class, but they'll still write it and go, close enough, you know what I meant. So I tried to model that with words, and I said, okay, let me write what I see in my mom's kindergarten class. And I wrote the word they, uppercase, lowercase, with an A instead of an E. And I'm like, would you want to read someone who writes like this? And they go, no. And I'm like, that same thing happens in math. So the same like punctuation, like commas, parentheses, we see that in math class. It's just different in what we're communicating. That's like a pause, where ours is like a separation, a list, something like that. But students are missing that in English, and then that's carrying over into math.
Thank you for that. Would you mind sharing your example of the
I said assumptions that they know things that they don't. So like for instance, if I'm on the board, omit number 2 and 3, I get asked a lot, what's omit mean?
Oh, yes. Yes.
To me, that's something basic. Or if I'm saying, what's the next operation? They're like, minus it from the other side. And I'm like, well, who are you talking, minus it? I'm like, and I'll say, what, you know what I mean? Trying to get them to transition and use higher level, you know what I mean, language for the math type of doing is appropriate. They're saying minus, and no, it's subtractive. If I say inverse operation, they're like, what are you talking about? So just, if they don't use it, they won't say it, and they won't know what we're talking about when we're talking to them. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
I've seen it, even though I've used a little bit of math in my class, and like I had a formula for, we were doing something on heart rate, and I had X for multiply, and they did not know what that meant. Or for divide, I would have like the backslash, or like, and they're looking at me like, what is that? So it's just like not knowing what the symbols are, like when I did math in my class, when I was trying to go through the formula. So bless y'all, math.
Right?
They don't know business.
So here's what research tells us about vocabulary and what happens to students as they progress. Even students who learn to read successfully in the lower grades will often plateau around 4th or 5th grade, because that's when the content starts to kind of level out against their prior knowledge, and they start getting vocabulary at a really rapid rate, and reading becomes hard, right? And if you don't have a good basis in vocabulary for new vocabulary to stick to, then reading's really hard, okay? So then what happens is reading is hard, I don't wanna read, so I don't read. But if I don't read, I'm not acquiring new vocabulary, and I'm not seeing language modeled the way it needs to be, so then my reading ability gets lower, right? And it's a vicious cycle. So I've done a lot of research on the best way to approach vocabulary in the secondary space, and if you Google vocabulary instruction, you're gonna come up with the name Michael Graves as one of the top hits. He has devoted his entire career to researching how we learn vocabulary and how to approach vocabulary instruction. He's developed a 4-pronged approach. He says that we need to make our students word conscious, have a language-enriched classroom, and that doesn't just mean posters on the walls, that means the discourse, the modeling that we're doing. And we need to explicitly instruct our academic vocabulary and explicitly instruct word learning strategies, which is the roots, right? Your morphology. So these top 2 are referred to as incidental acquisition of vocabulary, and the bottom 2 are very explicit, they're very intentional. So explicit instruction, this is when concepts are clearly explained, I think, but kind of an old school, not lecture, because we want to be very interactive with it, but we are clearly saying, today you are going to learn this. I'm going to model this for you. Now you show me that you understand it, right? Very, very cut and dry. High level of student-teacher interaction and ample, I know I'm preaching to the choir with math, ample practice prior to independent work. But with vocabulary, explicit instruction is when we intentionally set out to learn new words. It's very systematic. We know which words they need to learn before other words. We have that planned out. We're going to give them visuals. We're going to explain the semantics behind the word, multiple meanings, and maybe even give them a mnemonic device, a memory device to remember it. takes around 7 repetitions to solidify a word with explicit instruction. In incidental vocabulary acquisition, this is what we acquire just while we're reading or listening, just in our environment, like my 2-year-old granddaughter is acquiring hers mostly incidentally right now. And we have a part in that too, by the environment that we provide for our students and the opportunities we provide them with exposure to rich and varied language, like in music. But it takes around 20 repetitions for a word to solidify with incidental acquisition. So we definitely need to have both of these things going on. So I'm going to quickly deliver an explicit lesson in vocabulary, just a model of routine for you. And I want you don't have to write anything down. First, I need you to pretend to be my students for just a second. And secondly, I just want us to be able to debrief afterwards. What intentional instructional moves do you observe me making as I teach this lesson? Okay. So guys, today we're going to read a text, and the word accumulate comes up in the text over and over again. And I want to make sure you know what that means. I'm not sure that you do. So our new vocabulary word is accumulate. Will you say accumulate? Accumulate. Thank you. So to accumulate is to collect or pile up in increasing number, especially little by little over time. Accumulate is not just something dumps down all at once. It piles up slowly over time. So let's see how it might be used in a sentence. By morning, 4 inches of snow had accumulated on the ground. And the clue in there is by morning, right? Because it dropped all night. Intangible things can accumulate too. After weeks of investigating, the police had not accumulated enough evidence to arrest anyone. After weeks is a clue in there. The bird gathered straw bit by bit until she had accumulated enough to build her nest. Okay? So the word is accumulate. Turn to your partner and tell them something else that might accumulate. And I'm just going to walk around and listen. What's something else that might accumulate? So I've heard laundry, weight, debt. Y'all are sad. And it's been like that all day. When I do this lesson with adults, it's always negative. That's not my ceiling fan, by the way. But I was thinking about what could I show to really picture accumulate, and I thought that was a good one. So now something else about this word that you might not know, boys and girls, is that it has some word parts in it. This root in the middle is from the Latin cumulus. Cumulus clouds. So and they call them those cumulus clouds because they're puffy. Because the Latin cumulus means a heap of something. And then the suffix is a derivational suffix ate, can often, not always, but often means that word is a verb. Okay? So it can become that. So to accumulate is to become a heap. Pretty cool, right? So now, if I wanted to do some independent practice, and you're not going to do this part because I want to move on, we could do a mentor sentence. By morning, 4 inches of snow had accumulated on the ground. So I'd like for you to create your own sentence, hypothetically. By morning, blank of blank had accumulated blank. And they could be funny with it, tell them to keep it PG-13. But that's just a second way to quickly walk around and make sure that there are no wild misconceptions about the word accumulate. So, how long did this part take? Maybe 5 minutes, right? Maybe 5 minutes. What did you notice that I seem to be doing intentionally? What do you think I did intentionally with this lesson? Repetition.
The hand movements you accumulated.
Hand movements.
Pointing out
Working with your peers.
Giving you the chance to turn and talk process.
pointed out keywords and.
Yes, I talked about the context hints in the sample sentences. I gave a visual. I made you pronounce it several times, right? And I gave you the linguistic structure. And not every word will have, I picked this one on purpose, of course, so it would have that. But this is Anita Archer's explicit vocabulary routine, and it is a good way to introduce tier 2 vocabulary words, and we'll talk about what tier 2 words are in a moment. You introduce the word's pronunciation. Always make them say it back to you a couple of times. They'll be awkward about it at first, maybe, but make them do it anyway. Teach the word's meaning in kid-friendly language. Give them some synonyms. Explain the linguistic structure, and then have them do something. Turn to a peer and talk about it, or try to write a sentence with a word in it so that you can very quickly check for students' understanding. That is an example of an explicit vocabulary routine that can be done very quickly. That's gonna be more effective than look that word up in the glossary. That doesn't always help, right? Doesn't always help. So if you are an inquiry-based kind of teacher and you're thinking, explicit, that's just a lot of me talking. Explicit instruction is important, and like I said, I know I'm preaching to the choir with a lot of math folks in here, but that's how we get our foundational skills to use in more inquiry-based instruction. So now, if you would, just do a little interactive thing with me, either with your smartphone or on your laptop. I'm hoping you've got one or the other. If you have your laptop, go to menti.com. If you have your smartphone, there's the QR code, or you can go to menti.com. And you'll come to a place where you should be able to type in 2 words that would be considered standards-based vocabulary for the course that you teach.
What's a word? Answered it, yes. Now let's go. I'm just gonna- Seems like somebody already used my words.
So if you look up at the board, you can see them rolling in. If you've never used Mentimeter, it's free and it's a really quick and easy way to get students activated and engaged in your class at the beginning. You can have them create word clouds, you can do a poll, a quick poll, and it'll show the poll results in real time. Very, very user friendly. So now as I'm looking at this grouping of words, I'm seeing some extremely specific content words. Parabola. We only use that in a few contexts, right? But I'm also seeing some words that we might use across content areas. Import, median, dimensions, correspond or corresponding, argumentative. So we've got some really high level content words up here, but we've got some that are called tier 2 words. And this idea of tiering our vocabulary can be really helpful as we decide how we're going to approach teaching it. If we're going to teach it with that explicit routine, or is it a big, big word that we need to teach just like because it's our content, right? So tier 1 words are those words that we acquire in everyday speech. They're familiar to most students. They're primarily learned through conversation, primarily learned. We have an ELL student, they'll have their tier 1 in their own language, but they may not have acquired all the tier 1 language in English yet. And so we may need to support them there. Tier 2 are those high frequency words. They're kind of scholarly words, and they can be used across content areas. Elaborate, authority, generalize, deconstruct, things like that. And then tier 3 are going to be those words that are extremely specific to your content area, like polynomial, oligarchy, etc. We're not going to use that explicit vocabulary routine that I just modeled to teach tier 3 words. That's your content, right? You're going to be doing like full lessons on those things. But we could use that routine to hit some tier 2 words, those words that go across contents. So now I asked if you could bring a text that you might use with your students for your literacy block. If you don't have an article, I have some extras. I have several different subjects. I have social studies, music, math, science. If you need an article, let me know. Here's what I'd like for you to do. I'm going to cross out the tier 3. I just want you to look for tier 2. As you read, I'd like for you to identify potential tier 2 vocabulary words that you might need to pre-teach if you were going to use that article or piece of text with your students. Those are the high frequency words, but they go across content. Anybody need an article? Math one. Math? Thanks. Did you pass that? We're only a couple of minutes into skimming our articles, and as I'm walking around, I'm seeing some articles with lots of words marked. Some with maybe 5 or 6 marked, and it's going to depend on what text you brought, of course, and also the group of students that you teach. But if you have more than 4 or 5 words marked after you get to the end of an article, you need to make some decisions about what you're going to pre-teach. We don't want to front load a ton of vocabulary before embarking on reading a text, because research tells us when too many words are introduced prior to the text, they recall them anyway as they start to read. So what do you do to decide? Well, you got to look back through and think, is it absolutely critical for comprehension for them to know the meaning of this word, or is this a word they might be able to infer from context, etc.? Is it challenging to infer it from context? Is it an academic word being encountered for the first time? Probably you're not going to give them a reading selection to do independently with a brand new academic concept, but if it pops up in there, you're going to want to front load that. And then that last part, transportability, is that tier 2 aspect. Is the most bang for our buck, because that's a word that they can use across all of the content areas, right? So if you are going to do the instructional routine, then no more than 4 or 5 before you give the article, or they're gonna max out. Now, if you have like unit vocabulary words that you really want to give them, and you want them to have something to study from, and you know they're not really doing well with the copy the definitions out of the glossary and put those in your notebook and maybe make some Quizlet flashcards, that they're not learning it that way. Maybe, or they are, but they're memorizing it and they're regurgitating it on a test and then they forget them, right? I want to give you an alternate to that you might consider when you're going to get this PowerPoint. It's kind of a modified Frayer model if you're familiar with that. Instead of here are the 18 unit words, look them up and copy them down, do this with your students or let them do it in groups. have them write the word, a kid-friendly definition, synonyms or examples, antonyms or non-examples, a picture, and I mean just a doodle, some kind of symbol that will represent the word. And if you're not good at that, have a student come up and do it, right? They can come up to the document camera and do one for you. And then maybe a mnemonic device or something about the connotation of that word, a sample sentence or an analogy, if you can think of something to really help them learn it. The reason we want to do this is because our brain maps words through connections to other words. So we need those synonyms and antonyms. We also want to include a visual. We all know that a visual helps. Even, I know that they're high schoolers, but even movement sometimes. Y'all are gonna think this is dumb, I'm gonna say it anyway. I had a teacher who taught me about acute angles, and she said, this is your, your 180, your straight line, and this is a acute angle. I'm cute. Yeah, I know. All right, so what? All right, but have I forgotten the difference in acute and obtuse? No, I have not. Okay, so it worked. All right, so now speaking of connections and mapping, we're gonna play a little game. Anybody into this? Yes, I'm addicted to it as well.
Second person.
All right, so
I love it.
You
All right.
can't play today.
so you might not be able, if the one I put up here is one you've already done, no spoilers. Okay, so this is a game from the New York Times, and it is my latest edition. So they're going to present you with 16 words. The object of the game is to take those 16 words and group them into 4 groups of exactly 4 words each. 4 times 4 is 16. And those 4 words in each group, they have to have a common thread. There's a reason you're grouping them. These 4 words, these 4 words, these 4 words, etc. Feel free to talk to one another if you want to. If you feel like you've solved one, let me know and we'll try it out. About layer.
This one has a different meaning.
It doesn't fit the hive then and layer kind of words. Hive and web, but layer then. So the one I want hive then.
Like
We need metaphors, web,
All right, we have a guess. Nest, hive,
and then there's
web,
another
and then. Okay.
Web, layer, and den.
No web.
Hive,
Hive.
Nest, hive, okay, nest, hive, den, hive.
At the bottom.
Hive at the bottom, den and layer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Layer.
layer.
So, a lair, I don't know, I think of an evil villain living in a lair, but I guess animals.
Yeah, animals are like that.
Give me another.
Right, so it's like
net,
Cloud.
it's
Cloud.
online.
just,
Fair, good, equal.
Wait a minute, what about
Just
I'm going
even.
I think
No,
this
even,
one might be
even,
wrong.
even. I think it's.
Oh.
Because good isn't the same as even, is it?
So equal, even.
Just.
Like that, maybe?
Yeah.
So what is this?
That's like nothing.
But one more.
Probably something reasonable.
So it was as
Reasonable competition.
You did. We're showing our age.
All right, so what's the point? The point is to create those categories because you're looking for connections. The brain is a pattern-seeking organ. It's how we learn. Now, this is by the New York Times every day, but this also is a free web-based app where you can create these with your vocabulary. So you can create this game for your students, you know the groupings, and let them see if they can figure them out as an engagement strategy, because this is semantic mapping. Semantic mapping, and I don't have time to show this, but I hope you'll go back and watch this. It's only 3.5 minutes. It's so cool. Scientists have literally found how we map the categories of words in our brains and where they live. It's fascinating. You may even want to show it to your students. But we'll skip past that. So semantic mapping is a way to get students to activate prior knowledge and make connections.
What's the website that we go to if we're to build our own?
It's actually linked on the last slide. I've got like resources and it'll be linked there for you, and Stacey's gonna send it out to you.
All right, thank you.
You got it. So this is a visual strategy and it requires making connections. It's gonna activate schema. It's gonna let us have an idea of students' background knowledge on certain concepts, and it helps them build associations. So let's say you wanna get your students' minds cranked up and they're gonna help you. You put the word algorithm in the center. And then the ask is, all right, give me some words related to the word algorithm. To save time, I'm not gonna write them down, but will you call some out that they might call out or that you know? Algorithm, what else? What relates to algorithm? Instagram, TikTok. Instagram and TikTok, right? What else might they know about algorithm?
AI.
AI. Would any of them say formula?
Probably not.
We would.
You would. What else would you say about algorithm?
Process.
Process. What'd you say?
That's a gap
Plus I
information.
fail.
What? So after students brainstorm the words, then the next step is the most important step. They have to categorize the words, okay? Just like we were figuring out the categories in the connections game. So there's no right or wrong answers with the categories. There could be something illogical that you might, walk by a group and go, how did you group those? But there really is no right or wrong. It's not about right or wrong, it's about the process of making connections. Now, if you start doing a semantic map for algorithm and they say Instagram and TikTok and you get crickets, what does that tell you? They have no background knowledge about algorithm, right? They can't even begin to semantically map it because they don't have anything in here to pull from. So not only can it be a good way to make connections, it can be a good way to gauge background knowledge. So that takes us to, explicit word learning strategies. You set me up perfectly for this. So morphology, guys, can't talk enough about morphology. Dr. Marianne Wolf from UCLA's, she's the head of the UCLA Dyslexia Center. She was our keynote speaker for ELA in January. And she says morphology is the secret sauce. I love that. It is the key for students to be able to make sense of unfamiliar words. Okay? Who was talking about binomial? That was binomial, right? So they didn't know it. So you had already called out some of the common roots and affixes in your content. What are they again? What are the things that come up over and over again? Try, by, poly, uni, quad. So all the number ones, and those are mostly Greek, right? We know that those are mostly Greek. That Greek is a little harder than Latin. But what we know is that about 90% of our vocabulary, academic vocabulary, is based on Latin, and the other 10% is based on Greek. About academic vocabulary, not our everyday vocabulary necessarily. So if nothing else, we've got to work on making our students aware of that fact, okay? Even if you don't come in and have a straight up morphology lesson, you need to be always using the language of morphology. And you may need to pause and say, stop, we need to learn these, right? We need to learn these 5 this week. Capitalize on those teachable moments. Have the anchor charts up on the wall. engage them. Let's say you wanna do like a root of the week. Maybe they come in and these pictures are on the board and you say, hey, can you guess what the root of the week this week's gonna be? Frack. Frack. What do you think frack might mean? Break. But what is this? How does this break? And it's breaking the light into its prism, right? They might not know this one. Infraction, right? That's kind of an old school, like pink slips, what we used to do. And then when we break a hole into parts, right? I'm speaking your language. So that, really quickly with visuals, let them have time to confer and then see if they can come up with not only what they think the root of the week will be, but also the meaning of the root. This is more for my ELA people, but you could certainly do it too. This is a lot of fun. When you have morpheme matrices, you put a root in the middle, like spect. You teach them that it means to see or observe. Then you've got common prefixes and common suffixes. And then you might say, okay, work with a partner. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. How many real English words can you build? Not made up. Real English words can you build from these pieces? Go. And it's going to be inspect, inspects, inspected, respect, respectable, respect. You get the idea. At the end of this PowerPoint, you're going to have a list of 14 roots and 14 affixes. Those 28 word parts will unlock over 100,000 English words. Now, some of them are words that we don't ever use, but about 10,000 of them are words that we use in everyday language. Okay, so really powerful for students to have this knowledge. The last thing that I want to do, and I'm running out of time with you, is just touch on that top part about background knowledge. So here's what we know. Cognitive scientists that study the brain have known for a long time that the most important factor in reading comprehension isn't teaching them stuff like find the main idea, although we can do that. It's really the vocabulary they possess and the background knowledge they possess. So I just want to share something really quickly with you. In 1988, Leslie and Recht did a famous study called a baseball study. They wanted to see how much does someone's background knowledge really impact their reading comprehension. So they had a group of 8th graders. And they divided these 8th graders into 4 groups, and they presented them all with the same text on baseballs, kind of a hard text on baseball. The 4 groups were students with a high reading level and high knowledge of baseball, high reading ability, but they didn't know much about baseball, low reading ability, but a high knowledge of baseball, and then low. Okay, so they gave them the same test, the same text, and the same test. And here were the results. So the high highs and the low lows are exactly where we would think they would be, right? But look at the middle.
Yep.
So this is your low reading ability, but high knowledge of baseball.
Always high.
It wasn't even, if I showed you the numbers, it's not even statistically significant difference. The bar graph makes it look even more like a change difference than there is. But look at the dip there. High reading ability, but because they had a low knowledge of baseball, they got significantly fewer questions right than this group. And this study has been replicated. This wasn't just a one-off type of thing. So what do we learn from this?
They're not comprehending the actual knowledge of baseball. Like they don't comprehend it just because they can read it doesn't mean they understand.
Right. And it means students don't have just one reading level. They have multiple reading levels depending on the current knowledge of the topic that you're giving to them, right? So the last thing I'm going to offer you today is this. A lesson plan is for informational text on the front, argumentative on the back, and it helps you think through, as I read this text, what vocabulary will I front load and what background knowledge might I need to teach my students pretty quickly in order for them to access this text. Any last final thoughts, questions? I know, don't be that person that does that, right? Thank you for playing, y'all were very kind, thank you, y'all have a good night.